At 22, Melanie Ramsey had grown accustomed to the rhythm of frontier life, the early mornings tending to chickens, the afternoons helping her mother preserve food for the coming winter, and the constant vigilance that came with living on what her father called the edge of civilization. "Melanie," her mother's voice carried across the yard, "your father needs water brought to the south field." With practiced efficiency, Melanie filled 2 canteens and tucked them into a burlap sack. As she made her way toward the field, she passed the main house where her parents lived, and then the smaller cabin where her older brother Thomas resided with his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old son, little James. Their family was one of the more fortunate homesteaders in the area, with 40 acres of hard-won farmland carved from the unforgiving desert. The Ramsey farm sat in a small valley surrounded by red rock formations and vast stretches of arid landscape. To the east rose the mountains where, as her father frequently reminded them, the Apache made their home. The Apache, the enemy, the threat, the ever-present shadow over their lives. Since childhood, Melanie had been taught to fear and despise them. "Savages," her father would say over dinner, his voice hard as the rocks that dotted their land. "They have no understanding of progress, of civilization. They'd kill us all in our sleep if they could." Her brother Thomas, 7 years her senior, would always nod in agreement, his expression mirroring their father's hatred. Thomas had fought alongside a militia group 2 years prior when tensions had erupted into violence between settlers and the local Apache. He had returned with stories that haunted Melanie's dreams, tales of bloodshed and vengeance that painted the Apache as monsters, not men. "Water's here, Pa," Melanie called as she approached her father, who was fixing a portion of fence damaged in the last windstorm. George Ramsey straightened his back, his weathered face creasing into a brief smile at the sight of his daughter. "Good girl," he said, taking a long drink before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Your brother should be back from town soon. Sheriff Jenkins warned there's been Apache spotted near Miller's Creek again." Melanie nodded, having heard variations of this warning countless times before. "Do you need anything else, Pa?" "No, that'll do." He turned back to his work, dismissing her. As she walked back toward the house, Melanie found herself drawn to a narrow trail that led away from the farm. Without consciously deciding to, she followed it, her feet moving of their own accord toward her secret place, a hidden bend in the river that cut through their property, concealed by towering red rocks and a cluster of cottonwood trees. She had discovered it 3 years ago while exploring and had claimed it as her own. No one else in the family knew about this particular spot. It was the one place where Melanie could escape the confines of her life, the endless chores, and the watchful eyes of her parents, who still treated her like a child despite her age. The sound of running water grew louder as she approached. Pushing through the branches, she emerged into a small clearing where the river widened slightly, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by smooth rocks. Sunlight filtered through the leaves above, casting dappled patterns on the surface. Melanie sat on her usual rock, removed her boots and dipped her feet into the cool water. Here, alone with her thoughts, she could admit the truth to herself. She felt trapped. While she loved her family, the narrow confines of their existence suffocated her. The men made all the decisions, talked of adventure and the wider world, while she and her mother and sister-in-law Sarah were expected to content themselves with domestic duties. Sometimes in moments of daring thought, Melanie wondered what lay beyond the mountains to the east. What were the Apache truly like? Were they, as her father described them, or were they simply people defending their homes against encroachment? Such thoughts felt treasonous, and she never voiced them aloud. A rustling sound from across the river startled her from her reverie. Melanie froze, her heart pounding as she scanned the opposite bank. And then she saw him. He stood perfectly still, as if he had been there all along and she had simply failed to notice. Tall and broad-shouldered, with long black hair falling past his shoulders, his copper skin gleaming in the dappled sunlight. His clothing was leather and fabric she didn't recognize, adorned with beadwork and what looked like bones or teeth. A knife hung at his waist. An Apache warrior. Fear gripped her throat, every warning her father had ever given her flashing through her mind. She should run, scream, hide, anything but remain rooted to the spot staring at him. But something in his eyes held her there. They weren't the eyes of a monster or a savage. They were deep, intelligent eyes that regarded her with the same cautious curiosity she felt herself. For what seemed an eternity, they simply looked at each other across the flowing water. Neither made a move to flee or to attack. It was as if time had suspended itself in that moment of unexpected encounter. Then slowly, he raised his hand in what might have been a gesture of peace. Without thinking, Melanie raised her own hand in return. The warrior nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the undergrowth as silently as he had appeared, leaving Melanie trembling on her rock, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. But she knew she hadn't, and deeper still, she knew she would return to this place tomorrow, hoping to see him again. Baishan moved through the desert brush with the silence that had been trained into him since childhood. His people, the Chiricahua Apache, had lived in these lands for generations before the white settlers began claiming territory that had never belonged to them. At 28 winters, he had already earned his place as a respected warrior among his people, known for his tracking skills and wisdom in council. The white girl's presence at the sacred river had surprised him. He had been visiting this place since he was a boy, coming to seek guidance and peace in the flowing waters. It was a place between worlds, neither fully in the territory his people now primarily occupied, nor completely under the control of the white settlers. He had watched her before, though she had never seen him. Over the past moon cycle, he had observed her visits to the river, how she seemed to seek solitude there just as he did. There was something in her manner that spoke of a spirit not unlike his own, searching, questioning the boundaries placed around them. The elders of his tribe, including his uncle Nai Che, who was their leader, spoke with increasing concern about the encroaching settlers. Many young warriors called for war, for driving the white people from their lands once and for all. But others, including Baishan's mother Luyu, counseled caution, fearing the superior weapons and numbers of the white soldiers who would surely come. Baishan himself was torn. He had seen the destruction the white man brought, the senseless killing of the buffalo, the cutting of trees, the scars they carved into the earth in their search for gold and other metals. He had lost his father and 2 cousins in previous conflicts with the settlers, yet he also recognized the futility of all-out war. And now, having seen the girl up close, having looked into her eyes, he was reminded that not all white people were the same, just as not all Apache were the same. As he made his way back to his people's current camp, hidden high in the mountains where the white men rarely ventured, Baishan reflected on the moment he had shared with the white girl. There had been fear in her eyes, yes, but not hatred. Curiosity, perhaps, a reflection of his own. "You were gone long, my son," his mother said as he entered their dwelling. Luyu was mending a tear in a deerskin shirt, her fingers moving with practiced precision, despite her advancing years. "I went to the Speaking River," he replied in their language, using the Apache name for the place he had encountered the girl. His mother nodded, understanding his need for solitude. Since the death of his father 3 winters ago, Baishan had often sought the guidance of the spirits at the river. "Did you find what you were seeking?" she asked. Baishan thought of the white girl's face, the unexpected connection he had felt across the water. "I am not sure," he answered truthfully, "but I will return tomorrow." Later that evening, as the tribe gathered around the fire for the evening meal, Naiche spoke of increasing pressure from the white settlers. "They push closer to our hunting grounds each season," the elder said, his face grave in the firelight. "Their soldiers have established a new fort to the south." "Then we should strike now before they grow stronger," said Kichi, a young warrior known for his aggression and skill with weapons. Several others murmured in agreement. "And bring the wrath of their army down upon our women and children?" countered Luyu, her voice calm but firm. "We have seen what happens when we meet their violence with our own." "So we are to do nothing?" Kichi challenged. "Watch as they take everything? There is a difference between doing nothing and choosing our battles wisely," Baishan said, speaking up for the first time. All eyes turned to him. "The white man's way is to dominate through force. Perhaps our strength lies elsewhere." "You speak in riddles, Baishan," Kichi scoffed. "What strength is there but in the warrior's arm and true aim?" "The strength of knowing what they do not," Baishan replied, "of understanding both their ways and ours. Knowledge is a weapon too." The discussion continued late into the night with no clear resolution. As the fire died down and people retired to their dwellings, Baishan remained, staring into the glowing embers. Tomorrow he would return to the river, And somehow he knew the white girl would be there too. For 3 days, Melanie found reasons to escape to her secret place by the river, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. And for 3 days there was no sign of the Apache warrior. She tried to convince herself it was for the best. What madness had possessed her to raise her hand in greeting rather than flee? What would her father say if he knew? Yet disappointment settled heavily in her chest each time she found the opposite bank empty. On the 4th day, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the red rocks in deepening shades of crimson and gold, Melanie almost didn't go. Thomas had returned from town with news of increasing Apache activity in the region, and her father had sternly warned everyone to stay close to the house. But an inexplicable pull drew her back to the river. "I'll just collect some of those wild herbs Mother likes for cooking," she told herself, grabbing a small basket as a pretense. When she reached the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. He was there, sitting cross-legged on the opposite bank, as still as the rocks around him. This time he didn't vanish at her approach but remained, his dark eyes watching her calmly. Melanie hesitated at the edge of the clearing, her instinct for self-preservation warring with her curiosity. Everything she had been taught told her to run, to alert her father and brother. Instead, she slowly moved to her usual rock and sat down, keeping the width of the river between them. They regarded each other in silence for what seemed an eternity. There was something profoundly intimate about this wordless communion, this mutual acknowledgement of the other's presence, in a world that insisted they remain enemies. After a while, the warrior reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something. He placed it on a flat rock between them, then stood and backed away several paces, gesturing toward it with an open hand. Melanie hesitated, then curiosity overcame caution. She waded into the shallow river, the cool water swirling around her ankles as she approached the rock. Upon it lay a small, intricately carved wooden animal, a horse, she realized, rendered with remarkable detail despite its small size. She picked it up, marveling at the craftsmanship, turning it over in her palm. When she looked up, the warrior had moved closer again, watching her reaction intently. "Thank you," she said softly, knowing he probably didn't understand her words, but hoping her tone conveyed her gratitude. To her surprise, he nodded. "Thank you," he repeated, his accent thick but the words unmistakable. Melanie's eyes widened. "You speak English?" "Some words," he replied, touching his fingers to his chest. "Baishan, Baishan," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Then, mirroring his gesture, she touched her own chest. "Melanie." "Melanie," he said carefully, his lips forming each syllable with deliberate precision. The sound of her name in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. This was madness, she thought. Complete madness. Yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. Instead, impulsively, she reached into her basket and pulled out a small blue ribbon she used to tie back her hair sometimes. She placed it on the rock where the carved horse had been and stepped back. Baishan approached, picked up the ribbon and ran it between his fingers, examining the color against the fading light. He nodded his appreciation, then carefully tucked it into his pouch. As the sun sank lower, Melanie reluctantly gathered her basket. "I must go," she said, pointing toward her home, then making a walking motion with her fingers. "Tomorrow?" she asked, making a circular motion toward the sky and pointing to the same position the sun currently occupied. Baishan seemed to understand. He nodded once solemnly. "Tomorrow." As Melanie hurried back to the farm, her mind raced. She had spoken with an Apache warrior, exchanged gifts, arranged to meet again. If her family knew, they would think her bewitched or mad. Perhaps she was. Yet the carved horse in her pocket felt more real, more true than anything in her daily life. That night at dinner, as her father and brother discussed the Apache problem with grim faces, Melanie kept her eyes on her plate, afraid her expression might somehow betray her secret. When Thomas mentioned that Sheriff Jenkins had organized a militia patrol to send those savages a message if they come too close to town, her stomach twisted with anxiety. "Good," her father said firmly. "It's time they understood this land belongs to those who can use it properly." "The Apache have been here far longer than we have, Pa," Melanie said before she could stop herself. The table fell silent. Her father's bushy eyebrows drew together in a frown. "What did you say?" Melanie swallowed hard. "I just meant..." They were here first. This was their home before it was ours. Their home, Thomas scoffed. They just wander about following game. They don't build, they don't farm, they don't improve the land. That's not a home, that's just existing like animals. That's enough, Melanie, her mother said quietly, shooting her a warning glance. Pass the cornbread to your father. The conversation moved on, but Melanie could feel her father's eyes on her throughout the meal, assessing, suspicious. She would need to be more careful with her words if she didn't want to draw unwanted attention to her activities. Later, alone in her small room, Melanie took out the carved horse and studied it by lamplight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the flowing mane. The powerful muscles suggested with just a few precise cuts in the wood. Baishan had made this, she realized. These hands that she had been taught could only destroy had created something beautiful. What else had she been wrong about? Over the following weeks, Melanie and Baishan continued their clandestine meetings by the river. Each day their communication grew beyond simple gestures and the few English words Baishan knew. He began teaching her Apache words, and she helped him expand his English vocabulary. They exchanged small gifts. She brought him a pencil and paper once, fascinated as he quickly sketched her likeness with remarkable accuracy. He taught her to identify edible plants and showed her how to move quietly through the undergrowth. One afternoon, as summer's heat gave way to the gentler warmth of early autumn, Baishan brought a small pouch of dried berries to share. They sat closer now, both on the same side of the river, though still maintaining a respectful distance. "Your people," Melanie began carefully, having learned that direct questions could sometimes be considered rude in Apache culture. "Do they know you come here?" Baishan considered her question. His English had improved considerably through their meetings. "My mother knows I come to river, not know about you." He paused, then asked, "Your family know?" Melanie shook her head. "No. They would—" She searched for words he would understand. "They would be angry, afraid. Afraid of Apache." He nodded, understanding. It wasn't a question. "They don't know you," Melanie said softly. "They only know stories, bad stories." "Same for my people," Baishan replied. "Stories of white men who take land, kill buffalo, break promises." "Are the stories true?" Melanie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Some true," Baishan acknowledged. "Not all white men same. Not all Apache same." He looked at her directly. "You different from stories." Melanie felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You're different from the stories too." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Baishan stood. "Must go. Tomorrow?" It had become their ritual, this daily confirmation of meeting again. But tomorrow would be different. "I cannot come tomorrow," Melanie said regretfully. "My family goes to town for supplies. I must go with them." Disappointment flickered across Baishan's face, but he nodded in understanding. "Next day?" "Yes," Melanie promised. "The next day I will come." As she turned to leave, Baishan reached out, his fingers lightly touching her arm, the first time he had initiated physical contact. "Melanie," he said, his voice low, "be careful in town. Some men there hate Apache. Hate anyone who not hate Apache." The warning in his eyes was clear, and Melanie nodded gravely. "I'll be careful." The trip to town the next day was tense. Rumors of Apache sightings had the settlers on edge, and several men openly carried rifles as they went about their business. Melanie stayed close to her mother as they gathered supplies at the general store, trying to remain inconspicuous. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, leaned across the counter toward Melanie's mother. "Jenkins and his boys caught one of them yesterday. An Apache scout, slinking around Miller's Creek." Melanie froze, her hand hovering over a bolt of fabric she'd been examining. "What happened?" her mother asked, lowering her voice. "Oh, they questioned him right enough," Mrs. Peterson replied, with grim satisfaction. "Turns out there's a whole band of them camped up in the eastern mountains. Jenkins sent word to Fort Braverman. The army might finally do something about our Apache problem." Melanie's heart raced. Eastern mountains, where Baishan's people were. Fort Braverman meant soldiers, perhaps an attack. She needed to warn him. "Are you all right, dear?" her mother asked, noticing her pallor. "You've gone quite white." "I'm just tired from the journey," Melanie lied, forcing a smile. "And it's warm in here." The rest of the day passed in an agony of impatience. By the time they returned to the farm, Melanie had formulated a plan. She would go to the river at first light, hours earlier than their usual meeting time, and wait for Baishan. She had to warn him, had to tell him about the soldiers. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, haunted by images of violence, of Baishan's people caught unaware by attacking soldiers. By the time the first grey light of dawn appeared, she was already dressed and slipping quietly out of the house. The river was shrouded in early morning mist as Melanie hurried along the path. The clearing appeared empty when she arrived, but she settled on her usual rock, prepared to wait for hours if necessary. She didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, a figure emerged from the mist on the opposite bank, Baishan, moving with his characteristic silent grace. "Melanie," he called softly, clearly surprised to see her so early. "What wrong?" She waded across the shallow river to meet him, not caring that her skirts got wet. "Soldiers," she said urgently once she reached him. "From Fort Braverman. They know about your people in the eastern mountains." Baishan's expression hardened, his body tensing. "How you know this?" "In town yesterday. The sheriff captured an Apache scout. They questioned him." She couldn't meet Baishan's eyes as she said this, knowing what questioned likely entailed. "He told them about your camp. The sheriff sent for soldiers." For a long moment, Baishan was silent, his face unreadable. Then he reached out, taking Melanie's hand in his own. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm despite the gravity of the moment. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "You risk much to tell me this." "I couldn't let them hurt you," Melanie whispered. "Your people, they have children, mothers, elders." "Yes," Baishan confirmed, "not just warriors." He released her hand reluctantly. "I must go. Warn my people." "Will you leave? Move the camp?" Baishan nodded. "To the north. Place soldiers not know." He hesitated, then asked, "You come tomorrow, same time as always?" Despite everything, Melanie felt a surge of relief. He still wanted to see her. "I'll come," she promised. As Baishan turned to go, he paused, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have brave heart, Melanie Ramsey. Apache heart." Then he was gone, disappearing into the mist like a spirit. 2 days passed with no sign of Baishan at the river. Melanie returned at their usual time, her worry growing with each empty hour. Had his people moved safely? Had the soldiers found them? Or worse, had Baishan been captured while trying to warn his tribe? On the 3rd day, as hope began to wane, Melanie arrived at the clearing to find a small bundle of wildflowers placed on her usual rock. Relief washed over her. Baishan had been here, was still alive. But why hadn't he waited? Her answer came moments later when she heard voices approaching from the direction of the farm, male voices. Melanie quickly tucked the flowers into her basket and moved to the water's edge, pretending to be gathering the mint that grew there. "Melanie," Thomas's voice called as he pushed through the branches into the clearing, followed by her father. "What are you doing out here alone?" Melanie straightened, forcing a casual smile. "Just gathering mint for Mother's tea." She held up her basket as evidence. "How did you find me?" "Followed your tracks," her father said, his eyes scanning the clearing suspiciously. "You come here often?" "Sometimes," Melanie admitted, keeping her voice light. "It's peaceful." Thomas frowned, moving to the river's edge and examining the opposite bank. "You shouldn't wander so far from the house, especially not with Apache in the area." "Did the soldiers find them?" Melanie asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than anxious. "No," her father growled. "Got to their camp too late. Place was abandoned, still warm ashes in the fire pits. They'd been warned somehow." His eyes narrowed as he looked at her. Strange timing, that. Melanie's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. Perhaps they saw the soldiers coming. "Perhaps," her father agreed, though his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "In any case, Jenkins and some of the men are organizing regular patrols now. No one should be out alone, especially not young women." "I understand, Pa," Melanie said, gathering her basket. "I'll head back with you now." As they walked back to the farm, Melanie could feel her father's eyes on her, assessing, suspicious. She would need to be more careful, but she couldn't bear the thought of not seeing Baishan again. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Ramsey farm. Sheriff Jenkins, accompanied by a man in an army uniform whom he introduced as Captain Wilson from Fort Braverman. "We're organizing a more coordinated effort against the Apache threat," Jenkins explained as they sat around the Ramseys' dining table. "The captain here has men to spare, and we're recruiting able-bodied settlers to join the militia." "Count me in," Thomas said immediately. "Those savages need to learn once and for all that they can't terrorize decent folk." "Excellent," Captain Wilson nodded. "We need men who know the territory." He turned to George Ramsey. "Your name was mentioned as someone who might know these lands well, Mr. Ramsey." "Lived here 5 years," George confirmed. "Scouted all through these parts before settling. I know where they might hide." Melanie, serving coffee to the men, nearly dropped the pot at her father's words. If he joined this militia, if he helped them track Baishan's people— "Something wrong, Miss Ramsey?" Captain Wilson asked, noticing her distress. "No, sir," Melanie managed, recovering quickly. "The pot was hotter than I expected." Later, as she lay in bed listening to the men's voices continue their planning in the main room, Melanie made a decision. She had to warn Baishan again, had to tell him about this new threat. But how? With increased patrols, her father's suspicion and Thomas likely to be watching her movements, getting to the river would be nearly impossible. An idea formed in her mind. It was risky, perhaps foolish, but she saw no alternative. If she couldn't go to Baishan, perhaps she could leave a message, something only he would understand. The next morning, Melanie volunteered to collect eggs from the chicken coop, which sat at the edge of the property. While there, unseen by the house, she quickly gathered a small bundle of items: a piece of red cloth torn from an old dress, 3 white pebbles arranged in a line, and a sprig of sage bound with one of her hairs. She placed these on a flat rock, arranging them in a pattern Baishan had once shown her, a pattern that meant danger coming from the south, which was the direction of the fort. It wasn't much, but if Baishan was watching the farm as she suspected he sometimes did, he might see it and understand. 3 days passed with increasing tension. Thomas and her father joined the militia patrols, returning late each evening with reports of tracks found and abandoned camps discovered. Melanie lived in constant fear that one day they would return with news of a confrontation, of Apache captured or killed. On the 4th day, as she hung laundry on the line behind the house, Melanie noticed something unusual, tucked into the branches of a scrub oak nearby, a small object that caught the sunlight. Making sure no one was watching, she moved closer and discovered a tiny arrow, expertly crafted, with a distinctive feather pattern she recognized as Baishan's work. The arrow pointed north. That night, Melanie lay awake, formulating a plan. The militia was focusing its patrols to the east and south, believing the Apache had fled in those directions. But Baishan's message was clear: they had gone north, and he wanted her to know. Was he asking her to follow? The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. To leave her family, everything she knew, for a man, an Apache warrior she had known for mere months. Yet in those months, she had felt more alive, more herself, than in all the years before. Baishan saw her, truly saw her, not as a daughter to be protected, or a sister to be ordered about, or a future wife to be evaluated, but as Melanie, a woman with thoughts and feelings and courage of her own. The decision crystallized in her mind. Tomorrow night, when the men were away on patrol and her mother and Sarah were asleep, she would slip away. She would take the north trail and trust that Baishan would find her. The next day passed in a haze of anticipation and fear. Melanie went about her chores mechanically, trying to act normally while secretly gathering small essentials. A change of clothes, a water flask, the few coins she had saved, and the carved horse Baishan had given her, now her most precious possession. As evening fell, George and Thomas prepared to join the night patrol. "Lock the doors," her father instructed as they left, "and keep the shotgun loaded just in case." Melanie nodded, kissed him on the cheek, and waved as they rode off. Was this the last time she would see him? The thought brought an unexpected pang of grief, but not enough to change her mind. She waited until midnight, when the house was silent, except for Sarah's baby occasionally fussing in his sleep. Melanie, dressed in her sturdiest clothes, tucked her small bundle of possessions into a shawl and slipped out through the kitchen door. The night was clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to see the path. Melanie moved swiftly, her heart pounding, expecting at any moment to hear shouts behind her or see the glow of lanterns as her absence was discovered. But the night remained quiet as she put distance between herself and the only home she had known since coming to Arizona. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when a sound made her freeze, a soft whistle like a night bird, but with a pattern she recognized. Baishan had taught her this call during their meetings by the river. "Baishan," she whispered into the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of a boulder, and then he was there, standing before her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Melanie," he said, relief evident in his voice. "You came. You knew I would?" "Hoped," he corrected, then reached for her hand. "Not safe here. Patrols. Come." He led her off the trail and into the desert, moving with such confidence through the darkness that Melanie soon lost all sense of direction. They traveled for what seemed hours, scaling rocky inclines, crossing dry washes, always moving steadily northward and upward into the mountains. As the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, they reached a sheltered ravine where a small stream bubbled over rocks. Baishan gestured for Melanie to sit. "Rest here," he said. "Drink, eat." He offered her dried meat and berries from a pouch at his waist. As Melanie ate, suddenly ravenous after their long trek, she studied Baishan's face in the growing light. There was tension there, concern, but also something else, a softness when he looked at her that made her heart flutter. "Your people?" she asked between bites. "Are they safe?" Baishan nodded. "Safe, hidden, new camp where white men not look. And will they accept me?" This was the question that had nagged at her through the night. Would Baishan's tribe welcome a white woman, the daughter of settlers who had taken their land? Baishan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Some will not understand," he admitted. "Some will fear. But my mother will welcome you. And Naiche, our leader, is wise man. He will listen." "And you?" Melanie asked softly. "Why did you ask me to come? Why take this risk?" Baishan moved closer, taking her hands in his. His touch, once so foreign, now felt like coming home. "In my language," he said slowly, "there is word meant when two spirits recognize each other like mirror in still water. First time I see you at river, I feel this." He placed her hand over his heart. "My spirit know your spirit." Tears pricked at Melanie's eyes. "I felt it too," she whispered, "like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it." Baishan reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Path ahead not easy," he warned. "But we walk together?" It was both a statement and a question. Melanie answered by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his, a gesture she had dreamed of for weeks. Baishan tensed in surprise, then responded, his arms encircling her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, breathless, Baishan rested his forehead against hers. "Together," he whispered. "Together," she affirmed. After resting through the heat of the day, they continued their journey as evening approached. Baishan explained that they were taking a circuitous route to avoid militia patrols, adding days to their journey, but increasing their safety. On the third day, as they crested a ridge, Baishan suddenly pulled Melanie behind a boulder, his body tense with alertness. "What is it?" she whispered. "Horses," he replied quietly. "Coming this way." Moments later, Melanie heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats growing closer. Peering cautiously around the boulder, she saw a group of riders in the valley below, moving along the trail they had just left. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized two of the riders, her father and brother, riding alongside Sheriff Jenkins and several other men she didn't know. "They're looking for me," she breathed. "My family." Baishan nodded grimly. "They follow our trail. I not hide tracks well enough." Melanie felt a twist of guilt at the pain she must be causing her family. Would they think her kidnapped, killed? Or had they somehow guessed the truth, that she had left willingly with an Apache? "We must move," Baishan said urgently, taking her hand. "Different way, through high rocks where horses not go." They scrambled higher into the rocky terrain, using handholds and narrow ledges that would indeed be impassable for riders. Melanie's arms and legs burned with the effort, but fear drove her forward, fear not for herself, but for Baishan. If they were caught, the men would shoot him without hesitation. By nightfall they had put considerable distance between themselves and the search party, but Baishan remained vigilant, refusing to light even the smallest fire for warmth. They huddled together beneath an overhanging rock, sharing body heat as the desert night grew cold. "I'm sorry." Melanie whispered against his chest. "I've brought danger to you." Baishan's arms tightened around her. "You bring life to me," he corrected. Danger was always there. In the intimate darkness, Baishan spoke more openly than ever before, telling Melanie of his childhood, of Apache ways and beliefs, of the increasing pressure his people faced as more settlers arrived each year. She, in turn, shared stories of her life before Arizona, of growing up in Missouri, of the long journey west with her family seeking a new beginning. "My father isn't a bad man," she said softly. "He's just afraid of what he doesn't understand. And proud. Too proud to see that there might be another way." "Many men like this," Baishan replied. "Apache, too. Men who think fighting only path." He traced her cheek with his fingertip. "Takes more courage to seek peace than war." As dawn approached, Baishan grew more relaxed, confident they had evaded their pursuers. "One more day," he promised. "Then we reach my people." They traveled through that day, moving higher into the mountains where the air grew cooler, and pine trees began to appear among the desert scrub. By late afternoon, Baishan had grown alert in a different way, frequently stopping to examine marks on trees or rocks that Melanie couldn't discern. "We are close," he explained. "These signs from my people tell us path is safe." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, they crested a rise and Baishan stopped, pointing to a sheltered valley below. Melanie could just make out the shapes of dwellings, cone-shaped structures she recognized from descriptions as wiki-ups, the traditional Apache homes. "Your new camp," she breathed. Baishan nodded. "Home now. Your home, too." Melanie's stomach twisted with nervous anticipation. In moments, she would meet Baishan's people, would begin a new life among those she had been raised to fear. But looking at the man beside her, at the love and certainty in his eyes, she knew with unshakable clarity that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Together, they descended toward the camp, toward their future. The Apache camp buzzed with activity as Melanie and Baishan approached. Children played near the stream that ran through the center of the settlement. Women worked at cooking fires or crafts, and men tended to weapons or horses. At their approach, the activity ceased, all eyes turning to the unexpected sight of an Apache warrior returning with a white woman. Whispers spread rapidly. Children were called back to their mothers' sides. Several warriors moved forward, hands near their weapons, uncertainty and suspicion clear in their stances. Baishan stepped slightly in front of Melanie, raising his hand in a gesture of peace. "I bring no danger," he called out in Apache, then repeated in English for Melanie's benefit. "This is Melanie. She warned our people of soldiers. She comes in peace." An older woman emerged from one of the larger wiki-ups, her silver-streaked hair bound in a single braid, her face lined with the wisdom of years. Despite her age, she carried herself with dignity and strength. "Mother," Baishan said, inclining his head respectfully, "this is Melanie, the one I spoke of." Luyu approached slowly, her dark eyes taking in every detail of Melanie's appearance. Melanie fought the urge to fidget under such scrutiny, instead straightening her spine and meeting the older woman's gaze directly. After a long moment, Luyu spoke. "You risk much to come here, daughter of our enemies." "With respect," Melanie replied carefully, "I don't believe we need to be enemies." A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed Luyu's face. She turned to Baishan. "Naiche must hear of this. Bring her." They followed Luyu to the largest wiki-up in the camp, where an elderly man sat cross-legged before a small fire. Naiche's face was deeply lined, his hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp and alert as they entered. Several other men sat with him, including one Melanie recognized from Baishan's descriptions as Kichi, a warrior known for his hostility toward whites. Kichi sprang to his feet at the sight of Melanie. "Why do you bring a white woman into our sacred circle?" he demanded of Baishan. "Has she bewitched you?" "She saved our people," Baishan replied calmly. "It was her warning that allowed us to move camp before the soldiers came." "Or perhaps she is a spy," Kichi countered. "Sent to learn our new location." "Enough," Naiche said, his voice quiet but carrying undeniable authority. "Sit, Kichi. Let us hear what Baishan and this woman have to say." For the next hour, Baishan recounted everything. How he had first encountered Melanie at the river, their subsequent meetings, her warnings about the militia and soldiers, and finally, her decision to leave her people behind to join him. Throughout the telling, Nietzsche's expression remained inscrutable, his eyes occasionally moving from Baishan to Melanie and back again. When Baishan finished, the old leader was silent for a long moment. "You," he finally said, addressing Melanie directly, "daughter of the settlers, why would you betray your own people to help ours?" Melanie took a deep breath. "I don't see it as betrayal," she said carefully. "My family taught me to hate and fear the Apache, but in meeting Baishan I learned that much of what I'd been told was untrue. I couldn't stand by and watch innocent people, children, elders, be attacked for defending their home." "And now," Nietzsche pressed, "you come here to live among us? Why?" Melanie glanced at Baishan, drawing strength from his presence. "Because with him, I've found something I never knew was missing. Because here I hope to learn and to help build understanding between our peoples." "Pretty words," Kitchi scoffed, "but the white man's hunger for our land will not be satisfied with understanding." "Not all white men are the same," Melanie countered, "just as not all Apache are the same. There are those among my people who would seek peace if given the chance." "And your father?" Nietzsche asked shrewdly. "Would he seek peace?" Melanie hesitated, unable to lie. "My father is set in his beliefs," she admitted. "But he is one man. There are others." Nietzsche nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate her honesty. He turned to Luyu. "What say you, mother of Baishan, you who have counseled patience and wisdom in dealing with the white settlers?" Luyu studied Melanie for a long moment. "The girl has courage," she finally said, "to leave all she knows, to come alone into the camp of those she was taught to fear. And my son sees something in her that I have not seen in him since his father died. Hope." She straightened. "I say she stays, under my protection." Nietzsche considered this, then looked to the other men in the circle. Opinions were divided, some openly hostile, others cautiously accepting, most simply uncertain. "The choice is not simple," Nietzsche finally said. "To turn her away could mean her death, for surely her people will not welcome her back after she has lived among us. Yet to accept her brings its own dangers." He fixed his gaze on Baishan. "You would take responsibility for her, ensure she learns our ways, breaks no taboos, brings no harm?" "With my life," Baishan affirmed without hesitation. Nietzsche nodded, decision made. "Then she may stay, in Luyu's wiki-up, under her guidance." His eyes moved to Melanie. "You must learn quickly, daughter of settlers. Not all will welcome you as readily as Baishan and his mother. Prove your worth through actions, not words." "I will," Melanie promised, relief washing through her. She had passed the first test, been granted a place, if temporarily, in the tribe. As they left Nietzsche's wiki-up, Baishan squeezed her hand. "It is good beginning," he said softly. The following weeks were a time of profound adjustment for Melanie. Under Luyu's patient but firm tutelage, she began learning the basics of Apache life: how to identify edible plants, how to tan hides, how to move through the forest without disturbing a single leaf. The language came slowly, but she applied herself diligently, knowing that understanding their words was key to truly becoming part of the community. Not everyone accepted her presence. Kitchi and his supporters made their disapproval clear, often speaking loudly about the dangers of trusting any white person when Melanie was within earshot. Some women kept their distance, watching her with suspicious eyes. But others, seeing her earnest efforts, began to thaw. A few of the children, naturally curious, would follow her about, giggling when she stumbled over Apache words. One woman, Nasha, who had lost her husband to settlers' bullets, surprised everyone by offering to teach Melanie the intricate beadwork for which she was known. "My husband believed in looking forward, not back," Nasha explained when questioned about her friendliness toward the white woman. "He would say, 'This one's eyes are clear, her heart open. I choose to honor his wisdom.'" Melanie treasured these small acceptances, working twice as hard to prove herself worthy of the trust being tentatively extended. Yet even as she adapted to her new life, thoughts of her family haunted her. Had they given up searching? Did they believe her dead? The guilt of their pain weighed heavily, especially in the quiet hours before sleep. Baishan understood her conflict without her needing to explain. "Family bond strong," he said one evening as they sat by the stream, enjoying a rare moment alone. "Apache know this truth. Not wrong to miss those who raised you. I don't regret my choice." Melanie assured him, leaning against his shoulder. But I wish there was a way to let them know I'm safe, that I'm happy. Baishan was quiet for a moment, considering. Perhaps someday, he said carefully, when tempers cool, when hearts ready to listen. The thought gave Melanie hope that someday somehow reconciliation might be possible. As autumn deepened toward winter, the tribe prepared to move to their winter grounds, lower in the mountains, where the snow would be less deep and game more plentiful. The night before their departure, Baishan came to Luyu's wickiup, formally requesting to speak with both his mother and Melanie. Seated before the small fire, Baishan cleared his throat, uncharacteristically nervous. "Mother," he began, "Melanie has lived among us now for nearly 2 moons. She has learned our ways, earned respect of many." Luyu nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "She works hard, listens well, has good hands for healing plants." Baishan glanced at Melanie, his eyes soft in the firelight. "I wish to ask for your blessing, Mother. I wish to make Melanie my wife before we journey to winter grounds." Though they had never spoken the words directly, Melanie had known this moment was coming. Still, hearing Baishan's formal declaration sent her heart soaring. She looked to Luyu, anxious for her response. The older woman's face remained impassive for a long moment. Then she reached out, taking one of Melanie's hands and one of Baishan's, joining them in her own. "My son has chosen well," she said simply. "You have my blessing." The wedding ceremony took place the following evening, the entire tribe gathering to witness the unprecedented union. Melanie wore a dress Nasha and Luyu had helped her make, decorated with intricate beadwork, symbolizing her journey from one world to another. Baishan was resplendent in his finest clothing, his long hair adorned with eagle feathers to mark the solemnity of the occasion. Naiche presided, speaking of the power of love to bridge divides, of the courage it took to choose a different path than one's ancestors. Even Kichi, still skeptical but bound by tribal custom, participated in the ritual passing of the ceremonial pipe. As Baishan and Melanie exchanged the simple vows that would bind them together in the Apache tradition, Melanie felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found her true place in the world. When Baishan placed around her neck a necklace he had crafted, a small carving of 2 horses running side by side, suspended on a leather cord, tears of joy spilled down her cheeks. "2 spirits," he whispered as he tied the cord, "running together." The tribe celebrated with dancing and feasting long into the night. For the first time, Melanie felt truly accepted, not just tolerated, but embraced as one of their own. She was no longer simply the white woman, but Baishan's wife, Luyu's daughter by marriage, a member of the tribe. Winter passed in the lower camp, a time of stories told around fires, of closer quarters that allowed Melanie to become more deeply integrated into daily life. By the time spring brought the first wildflowers, she was speaking Apache with growing confidence, had earned genuine friendships among the women, and had found her place as an assistant to the tribe's healer, her knowledge of settler medicines complementing the traditional remedies. It was during this spring that Melanie discovered she was with child. Luyu confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile, placing a gentle hand on Melanie's still flat stomach. "Strong spirit grows here," the older woman said. "Child of 2 worlds." When Melanie told Baishan that evening, his reaction was one of pure joy. He lifted her in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned about being too rough. "Our child will build bridge between worlds," he said, his hand reverently touching her abdomen. "Show new way forward." As spring progressed toward summer, however, tensions between settlers and the Apache intensified once again. The tribe's scouts reported increased militia activity, new settlements encroaching ever closer to traditional Apache territories. Naiche called frequent councils, struggling to find a path that would protect his people without escalating into open warfare. During one such council, as the men debated strategies, Melanie listened from just outside the circle, as was custom for women unless specifically invited to speak. The discussion had grown heated, with Kichi and his supporters pushing for aggressive action against the newest settlement, while Baishan and others counseled caution. "They understand only force," Kichi insisted. "We must show strength, or they will think us weak. And bring more soldiers down upon our women and children," Baishan countered. "There must be another way." Melanie shifted uncomfortably, her hand moving protectively to her growing belly. The child within her would be born into this conflict, a living embodiment of both sides. There had to be a way toward peace. Suddenly, she stood, breaking protocol by stepping into the men's circle. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathering. "Forgive me, Nietzsche," she said, bowing her head respectfully to the elder. "I speak out of turn, but I cannot remain silent." Nietzsche studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Speak, daughter of two peoples. Perhaps your vision sees what ours cannot." Melanie took a deep breath. "I know the settlers' ways, their fears. They fear what they do not understand, and they do not understand the Apache. But fear can be overcome with knowledge." She looked around the circle, meeting each man's eyes in turn. What if there could be a meeting? Not for treaty-making as before, which always ended in broken promises, but for true understanding. Kitchi scoffed. They would never agree. And if they did, it would only be to set a trap. Not if it were on neutral ground, Melanie persisted. Not if it were mediated by those trusted by both sides. She turned to Nietzsche. "The missionary at San Carlos, Father Benedict. He is respected by many settlers, yet has spoken against violence toward the Apache. He could help arrange such a meeting." The idea sparked intense debate. Many shared Kitchi's skepticism, but others, including Baishan and surprisingly Nasha, voiced cautious support. "What do we lose by trying?" Nasha asked. "If they come with violence in their hearts, we are no worse off than now. If they come seeking understanding, even if only a few, is that not worth the attempt?" Nietzsche listened to all sides, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When all had spoken, he raised his hand for silence. "The child of two worlds speaks with wisdom beyond her years," he said, nodding to Melanie. "Fear and mistrust run deep on both sides, like ancient rivers carving canyons. But rivers can change course, given time and the right conditions." He straightened. Decision made. Baishan and Melanie will go to this missionary. They will propose a council of peace, to be held when the summer moon is full, at the place where three rivers meet. The declaration stunned the circle into silence. To send Baishan, one of their most respected warriors, and Melanie visibly carrying a child, was both a profound gesture of trust and a calculated risk. Together, they represented the possibility of harmony between their peoples. "It is decided," Nietzsche said, rising to his feet, signaling the end of discussion. "Prepare for the journey. You leave at first light." As they readied for the 3-day journey to San Carlos, where the small mission was located, Melanie felt both trepidation and hope. This was her chance to help create the bridge between worlds that she and Baishan had spoken of, a future where their child could live without having to choose between halves of their heritage. The journey was uneventful, though Baishan remained vigilant, constantly scanning the terrain for signs of danger. They arrived at the modest mission as the sun was setting on the 3rd day. Father Benedict, a lean man with kind eyes and a graying beard, welcomed them with surprised but genuine warmth. "I have heard of you," he said to Melanie after introductions were made. "The settler's daughter who chose to live among the Apache. Many thought you dead or captive." "I am neither," Melanie replied firmly. "I am here of my own choice, as Baishan's wife, and soon to be the mother of his child." The priest's eyes widened slightly at this, his gaze dropping to her swollen belly, but he nodded respectfully. "God works in mysterious ways," he murmured. "Perhaps this child is part of his plan for peace in these troubled lands." Over a simple meal, they explained Nietzsche's proposal, a gathering of equal numbers from both communities, unarmed, at the junction of 3 rivers, a place considered neutral ground by both Apache and settlers. Father Benedict would serve as mediator, ensuring that voices from both sides were heard with respect. "It will not be easy to convince some of the settlers," the priest warned. "There is much bitterness, much fear." "The same is true among my people," Baishan acknowledged. "But if even a few come with open hearts, it is beginning." Father Benedict considered for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "I will help," he promised. "I will speak to those I know to be reasonable men. Rancher Davis, who trades fairly with all people. Dr. Thompson, who has treated Apache patients alongside settlers. Perhaps even the new territorial representative, who seeks solutions beyond mere force." Melanie felt a surge of hope at these names. Men she knew or had heard of, men who might indeed listen. "And," the priest added hesitantly, Would you wish me to approach your family, Melanie? Your father and brother still search for you, though less frequently now. The question caught her off guard. The thought of facing her family again, of explaining her choices, of introducing Baishan as her husband, filled her with both longing and dread. Yes, she decided after a moment, they should know the truth, even if they cannot accept it. And perhaps seeing me happy, healthy, and carrying a child might help them understand. The return journey to the tribe was filled with cautious optimism. Father Benedict had promised to send word within 2 weeks as to which settlers had agreed to attend the council. Baishan and Melanie spent the travel time discussing how best to prepare their own people, knowing that convincing some, particularly Kitchi and his followers, would require all their diplomatic skills. They were a day's journey from the summer camp when disaster nearly struck. As they made their way through a narrow canyon, Baishan suddenly froze, holding up a hand for Melanie to stop. His keen eyes had spotted something ahead, the unmistakable tracks of several horses recently made. "Militia patrol," he whispered, examining the ground more closely. 6, maybe 7 riders. They backtracked quickly, seeking an alternate route, but the sound of approaching horses told them they had been discovered. Within moments they were surrounded by armed men, and at their head rode Thomas Ramsey, Melanie's brother. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Thomas stared at his sister in shock, taking in her Apache clothing, her pregnant condition, her hand clasped firmly in Baishan's. "Melanie?" he finally managed, his voice cracking. "My God, you're alive." "Yes, Thomas," she replied steadily, though her heart raced. "I'm alive and well, as you can see." Thomas's gaze hardened as it shifted to Baishan. "Get away from him, Mel," he ordered, raising his rifle. "We're taking you home." "I am home," Melanie said firmly, stepping closer to Baishan rather than away. "This man is my husband. The child I carry is his. I went with him willingly, Thomas. I love him." Confusion and disgust warred on her brother's face. "That's not possible," he insisted. "He's bewitched you or—" "No," Melanie interrupted. "I've never seen more clearly. Please, Thomas, lower your weapon. We don't want violence." For a tense moment, it seemed Thomas might refuse, might give the order to fire. Baishan stood perfectly still beside her, ready to move if necessary, but making no aggressive gestures. "We're on our way back from meeting with Father Benedict at San Carlos," Melanie continued, her voice calm despite her fear. "We're trying to arrange a peace council between our peoples. Please, be part of the solution, not more bloodshed." Something in her words, or perhaps simply the sight of his sister standing tall and unafraid, gave Thomas pause. Slowly he lowered his rifle, though his expression remained troubled. "Father needs to see this for himself," he finally said. "He'll never believe it otherwise." "That's why we're arranging the council," Melanie explained, "so all can see and hear the truth for themselves. In 3 weeks' time, at the junction of 3 rivers, Father Benedict will be there as mediator. Will you come, Thomas? Will you bring Pa?" Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between his ingrained hostility toward the Apache and his love for his sister. "I'll tell him," he finally said. "I can't promise more than that." It was a small victory, but a significant one. As Thomas and his men rode away, having extracted a promise from Melanie that she would be at the council, she felt a glimmer of hope that had not been there before. Her brother had seen her, truly seen her, as a woman making her own choices, not as a victim to be rescued. "You were very brave," Baishan said softly, once the riders were out of sight. "Your words touched his heart, even through his anger." "He's a good man," Melanie replied. "Stubborn like Pa, but not cruel. If he comes to the council, if he sees how we live, how we love, perhaps he can help Pa understand too." The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Father Benedict sent word that several influential settlers had agreed to attend, including, to Melanie's surprise and relief, her father and brother. Among the Apache, Nietzsche had selected 10 representatives, including Baishan himself and, in a move that surprised many, Kitchi. "Better to have his voice in the council than raised against it afterward," the old leader explained pragmatically. The day of the council dawned clear and warm. The junction of 3 rivers, a beautiful spot where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the flowing water created a natural sense of boundary and meeting place, had been prepared with simple seating, logs arranged in a large circle. The Apache arrived first, setting up a temporary camp nearby. Melanie, now heavy with child, was helped onto a comfortable seat by Luyu, who had insisted on accompanying them despite not being officially part of the council. "My grandchild gives you strength," the older woman said, placing a hand on Melanie's belly. "Let that strength guide your words today." As midday approached, the settlers began to arrive. First Father Benedict, then several men Melanie recognized from her previous life. Davis, the rancher, Dr. Thompson, the territorial representative whose name she now learned was Adams, and finally, riding side by side, her father and brother. George Ramsey had aged in the month since she'd last seen him. His face was more deeply lined, his shoulders slightly stooped. When his eyes found her across the gathering, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his features: relief, confusion, grief, and something like anger. The initial moments were tense, with both groups keeping to themselves, eyeing each other warily across the circle. Father Benedict called everyone to be seated, offering a brief prayer for open hearts and minds before explaining the purpose of the gathering. "We are here not to negotiate treaties or lands," he clarified, "but to listen and understand, to see each other as people, not enemies." At the priest's invitation, Nietzsche spoke first, his dignified bearing and measured words setting a tone of respect. He spoke of the Apache's deep connection to the land, of their desire to live in peace if their basic rights to existence were acknowledged. Territorial Representative Adams responded with surprising candor, acknowledging past injustices while expressing hope for a future where cooperation might replace conflict. Others followed, Kitchie voicing the legitimate grievances of his people, Davis suggesting practical arrangements for shared access to water sources, Dr. Thompson proposing medical exchanges to benefit both communities. Throughout, Melanie watched her father, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. When it came time for Baishan to speak, George Ramsey's attention sharpened, his body tensing visibly. Baishan stood, his presence commanding yet peaceful. He spoke of change, of the courage it took to question one's upbringing, to see with new eyes. He spoke of Melanie, how she had taught him that individuals could transcend the boundaries set by history and hatred. "My wife carries our child," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the circle. "A child of both worlds. What future do we create for such children? One of continued bloodshed, or one of new understanding?" When he finished, a profound silence fell over the gathering. It was broken by George Ramsey, who stood slowly, all eyes turning to him. "My daughter," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "was raised to be a proper Christian woman, to respect her family, to know her place." He looked directly at Melanie. "When she disappeared, I thought her dead, or worse. I blamed your people," he said to Baishan, "hunted them with hatred in my heart." He paused, visibly struggling with his next words. "But I see her now, alive, strong, changed, yes, but my Melanie still." His eyes moved to her swollen belly. "Carrying a child, my grandchild." The admission seemed to cost him greatly, but once spoken, a weight appeared to lift from his shoulders. "I don't understand her choice," he continued honestly. "I don't know if I ever will, but she is my daughter. And if this is the life she has chosen," he faltered, "then perhaps there is something in it worth understanding," Thomas finished for him, standing beside his father, a hand on the older man's shoulder. Melanie felt tears streaming down her face, unashamed of showing such emotion before both her peoples. This was more than she had dared hope for. Not acceptance, not yet, but an opening, a willingness to try. The council continued until sunset, with more voices being heard, more perspectives shared. No grand solutions were reached, no treaties signed, but something more valuable had begun. A genuine dialogue, the first tentative threads of understanding being woven between communities, long divided by fear and misunderstanding. As the gathering broke up, with plans made for another council in a month's time, George Ramsey approached his daughter. For a moment, he simply looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman she had become. "You look like your mother," he finally said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "She always was, the strongest of us all." "I miss her," Melanie replied simply. "I've missed all of you." George nodded, then glanced at Baishan, who stood respectfully nearby. "Your husband, he treats you well?" "With love and respect," Melanie assured him. We are building a good life together. Something like resignation mixed with the faintest hint of acceptance crossed George's features. When is the child due? Within a moon cycle, Melanie said, placing a hand on her belly. Would you like to feel your grandchild? It was a bold invitation, one that crossed boundaries of propriety and culture. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then, hesitantly, George Ramsey reached out and placed a weathered hand on his daughter's swollen abdomen. As if on cue, the baby kicked, a strong, healthy movement against his palm. George's eyes widened, then softened. Strong, he murmured, like its mother. And its grandfather, Melanie added gently. Before he could respond, Thomas joined them, his own stance toward Baishan less hostile than before, if still cautious. Father Benedict says you're welcome to visit the mission any time, he told Melanie. And, well, Mother would want to know you're all right. Maybe you could write to her. I'd like that very much, Melanie agreed, her heart full. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. As they prepared to return to their respective communities, Baishan approached George Ramsey directly, standing tall and unafraid before the man who had once hunted him as an enemy. Your daughter has great heart, Baishan said simply. She brings honor to both her peoples. George studied him for a long moment, then gave a single, stiff nod. See that you honor her as she deserves, he said, the words both warning and a grudging acknowledgement of Baishan's place in his daughter's life. That evening, as the Apache made camp for the night before returning to their summer grounds, Baishan and Melanie sat by the river, reflecting on the day's events. It is good beginning, Baishan said, echoing his words from months before, when Melanie had first been accepted into the tribe. Yes, she agreed, leaning against his strength, her hand resting on their child within. A bridge between worlds, just as we hoped. For our child, Baishan said, covering her hand with his own. A world where they need not choose between mother's people and father's people, where they can be proud of both. For all children, Melanie amended, those born and those yet to come. 2 weeks later, under a full summer moon, Melanie gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Luyu and the tribe's midwife guiding her through each powerful contraction, until, with a final triumphant push, her child entered the world with a lusty cry. Strong lungs, Luyu laughed, as she cleaned the infant and placed her in Melanie's eager arms. Like her mother when arguing a point, Baishan, who had paced anxiously outside during the birth, as was custom, was called in to meet his daughter. The look of wonder on his face as he gazed upon the tiny life they had created together brought fresh tears to Melanie's eyes. She is perfect, he whispered, touching the baby's soft cheek with a gentle finger. What shall we name her? In Apache tradition, children were not named immediately, often waiting until they showed some characteristic or quality that suggested an appropriate name. But Melanie had been thinking about this moment for months. I was thinking, she said softly, of Alali. It means harmony in Cherokee, another native people from where I was born. And in my language, we could also call her Harmony. Alali, Baishan repeated, testing the name. Harmony between worlds. It is good name. He smiled down at his wife and daughter. Very good name. 3 days later, as was traditional, the tribe gathered to welcome the new child. To Melanie's surprise and joy, there were additional guests. Father Benedict had brought Thomas, who had in turn convinced George Ramsey to come, along with Sarah and little James, Melanie's nephew. It was the first time settlers had been invited to such an intimate Apache ceremony. Some, like Kitchi, were clearly uncomfortable with the breach of tradition, but Naiche had approved it, seeing in this moment the embodiment of the new path they were attempting to forge. As little Alali was presented to the tribe, her mixed heritage visible in her features, her father's high cheekbones and copper skin tone, her mother's curling hair and grey-green eyes, Melanie looked around at the gathered faces. Apache warriors and white settlers, standing together not in conflict but in celebration of new life. There was still much work to be done. Centuries of mistrust would not be erased in days or weeks or even years. The path ahead would have challenges, setbacks, moments when old fears and prejudices would resurface. But as she watched her father tentatively accept the ceremonial pipe from Naiche, as she saw her brother's son playing with Apache children, As she felt Baishan's strong arm around her and their daughter secure against her chest, Melanie knew with certainty that they had begun something profound. A new story was being written in the Arizona territory, not one of conquest or resistance, but of understanding, of respect, of love, powerful enough to bridge the divide between worlds. And little Alali, sleeping peacefully amid the gathered communities, was its living promise. Together they would write the next chapter. The end. If you've come this far, take a deep breath and let this story settle gently in your heart. Because this isn't just the story of Melanie and Baishan, it's also a reminder for all of us that love, courage, and understanding have no age, no boundaries, and no time limit. Life often teaches us to fear what we don't know, to stay safe, to hold on to the familiar. But sometimes the greatest peace comes when we dare to open our hearts again, when we let compassion replace judgment, and when we choose hope instead of fear. Like Melanie, we all have rivers we must cross, moments when our spirit asks us to listen, to forgive, and to believe once more in connection. And you, dear soul listening tonight, have already crossed many rivers. You've loved, you've lost, you've learned. Perhaps you carry old scars or quiet memories, but know this: you are still protected, still guided, and still capable of beauty and kindness that touch lives around you. The world is softer because you are in it. So as you close your eyes tonight, may peace wrap around you like a warm desert wind. May your heart rest knowing that every season of life still holds wonder, and that tomorrow will greet you gently, with light, with strength, and with grace. With all our gratitude. Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story brought you comfort, made you feel seen, or gave your heart a little warmth tonight, please support our channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing it with others. From the bottom of our hearts, we are grateful to walk this storytelling path with you. Your encouragement keeps us inspired to bring you more tales of love, redemption, and emotional turning points. At the end of this video, you'll find a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by more heart-stirring moments. Thank you for being here. The Wild West Whispers team.